But we're continuing in our series called Skeptical, where each week we're tackling a different question that skeptics may ask about our faith. I want to apologize to some of you guys that are like, man, every week we're like talking deeply into like intellectual things and everything's so technical. I want you guys to bear with me throughout this sermon series. Honestly, it's been a huge blessing for my own self just to study each week on a lot of those topics. But this week we're going to be tackling a question that says, doesn't science disprove God? Doesn't science disprove God? Let me read our passages this morning. Genesis 1:1 states this: in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then Romans 1:18-22 says this: for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolishness hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, and animals, and creeping things. The word of the Lord. Let's pray. Dear God, I just want to thank you just once again, just for this opportunity, O Lord, just to learn and to dig deeper into our faith. Lord, I pray that all of our hearts and our ears may be open, and may we be teachable, O Lord, to your words. Lord, I just pray that the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts may be holy and pleasing to you. Lord, at the end of the day, I pray that your gospel may be preached, and may your Holy Spirit convict our hearts and open up our eyes to see your truths. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So just to recap, in the life of faith, doubts often come. So many people, I think, that grew up in the church or are accustomed to believing, they think any shred of doubt that comes their way, it's like a life-changing, oh my gosh moment where they're like, my life is slipping away or my faith is slipping away. But that's not true. Doubts are normal in the life of faith because, one, it makes us dig deeper into truth, and two, it leads us to trust in the mysteries of God. A famous theologian, Paul Tillich, once said this: doubt isn't the opposite of faith, but it's an element of faith. It's an element of faith. The most important thing is how we respond to those doubts. Sometimes when we have doubts, we fall away from their faith, or we stop thinking about it entirely and we place faith in a little box and keep it kind of under the mattress where we're like, all right, I'm just not going to think about it. Or when we have doubts, it causes us to dig deeper, to read more books, to ask questions, and then we find that we have a stronger foundation through our journey to find truth. My hope is that our doubts may lead us to do the latter. I think today's question, doesn't science disprove God, is kind of like more or less one of the easier questions throughout this whole sermon series. I mean, man, last week we talked about hell, man. I was sweating while doing that one. But this one's a little bit easier simply because it's been debated over and over again for a long time. For a lot of people who have been interested in this subject, you guys maybe have watched a few debates online or maybe read some books, and I hope that this may be just a little bit of a reminder for you. However, it's still one of the most popular questions that are brought up time and time again. Doesn't science disprove God? And I just want to say I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to act like I know all the theories and all those things. There's probably others in this room that are more versed in these areas. But I do a lot of research, and I like reading, and I watched a lot of debates. But more than anything else, I really believe that more than scientific debates, this is a very theological question, a very theological and even philosophical question. The question, doesn't science disprove God? Now, if you ask like a lot of the popular atheists these days, like Richard Dawkins and Christopher Hitchens and maybe Stephen Hawking, we all know these names. They're like out in the public. They're going to certainly think so. I mean, many others who have read their books or have been influenced by them, they're probably like, yeah, I think it does. And the logic goes like this, right? Religion at one point or in the past made sense to people because they didn't have much scientific knowledge. For instance, they thought that mental disorders were evil spirits, and people used to pray for rain because they couldn't predict the weather patterns and stuff like that. People needed a God to explain the moons and the sun and the sky, and they came up with all this mythology. But now that we know the science behind it, we don't need God. We can see that life forms came from evolution, a process of how everything came together. We can make medicine to feel better, to get healed. We don't need to pray to the divine anymore. Therefore, science killed God. And I'm pretty sure a lot of us maybe have come to a point or met somebody that had that similar storyline. You know, they were once religious people who grew up in the church. They learned about God. They went to VBS, did the motions and sang the songs. They went to the retreats, heard the guy preach, and they shed a few tears saying, God, I'm sorry, and felt really guilty. And then one day they went to college. They met an atheist friend who was super, super nice, super charming, super like everything good, respectful, but they had opinions and they questioned, like, why do you believe in a God? How can you prove it? And suddenly you realize that you have no really good reason to say that you believe in a God, and you have no concrete proof, and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I can't verify it. Oh my gosh, I can't prove it. Why do I believe? And suddenly they say, all the scales fell off of my eyes, and suddenly I was enlightened, and I realized that there is no God. No more ultra Santa Claus that will send me, to up or down. You're like, I'm free. And behind this thought that all people have when they come to this decision, they think that those who believe in a God are living by blind faith, while those so-called enlightened people or more informed people who know all these new discoveries, who know science, are intellectual people who are grounded in reason and good evidence. Therefore, you see this dichotomy come out, right? Science versus religion, or faith versus reason. And they said if you have faith, then you got to give up reason. Or if you have reason, you got to give up faith. But what I hope to accomplish today is that it's not pitted against each other. It never has been. In fact, science has never been an enemy of religion, nor has reason and logic been an enemy of faith. In fact, science was born out of a deep belief that a logical and reasonable God made the world to work in a certain way. And we're now just figuring out how God created the world. And when we look at the design of the world, we find that there are actually signposts or even evidences that point to a world that was designed for a purpose. The world has a creator rather than random floating matter that came together, collided together, and somehow formed life. And it gives it more meaning and purpose and a destiny. One of the reasons why I added the Bible passage, Genesis 1:1, is in this verse that our children had to memorize, right? This statement becomes a foundation of how we see the world. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The entire Bible starts off of this premises. This is a faith statement which we believe, in which we believe the world actually points to. And if we believe that God created the world, who created the world to function in a specific way, then every single new discovery that we find helps point to the amazing creativity and intelligence of God and how great he is. However, if we hold on to the belief that God is not true, we see that same evidence and we look at it and we're like, oh my gosh, man is so great, we discovered everything. Can you see the different mentality in the two? Our faith statements shape the way we see the world or want to see the world. And they blind us from what's actually there. One of the biggest debates that have sprung out of this mindset was this whole debate on creation versus evolution. It was really popular in like the beginning of the century, and there was big debates on it, and then it got squashed for a while, and then it was brought up again. In fact, 3 years ago, this is kind of the whole idea where the Genesis accounts of how God created the world in 6 days just doesn't make sense. And they're like, oh, this is all baloney. It doesn't scientifically add up. But 3 years ago, this debate was brought out again. Probably, I think it was to make money because, I was looking at it. I was like, why are they bringing this up again? Like, it's a dead issue. And then, it was Bill Nye the Science Guy, who's kind of more of an actor these days, more than a science guy. And then it was this guy named Ken Ham. I was like, man, why, out of all the people they can bring onto a debate, why Ken Ham, He's like a fraction of like the Christian world. There's so many smarter people. But as I was watching this debate, and in my opinion, I kind of got frustrated because they were arguing about a lot of details that I didn't feel like mattered. Arguing about a lot of details that didn't matter about proving God. When people begin to debate the Bible using science, I often think they miss the bigger point. See, Bill Nye the Science Guy was talking about how evolution is real and the processes of millions of years of the earth in the making. And he was like, okay, therefore the Bible is wrong. While the other guy was like, all right, I'm going to prove to you that the earth was created in 6 days. And he starts going on about it, how it scientifically adds up. And I was sitting there like, oh my gosh. It's not that I disagreed with these people. They both made good points. But I got frustrated because a lot of these arguments had nothing to do with whether God was real, but more to do with a certain process. And they were fighting on a scientific level, trying to prove their science on each side, when I believe that the crux of the debate was really a worldview problem, a philosophical problem, a theological one. You know, when reading Genesis and the story of creation, many scholars agree that the intention of the author was never to write scientific steps or the specific hows of how the world formed, right? But it was more concerned about explaining the whys. The creation of why God created the world and what he intends for it. See, the creation story in the Bible at the fundamental core is not a science book. In its literary form, it's actually more poetic in nature. And it's written for the purpose of answering why the world was created, not how. And even amongst most theologians and even the most orthodox ones, including our denomination, which we're really, really conservative, but even them, they're like, all right, yeah, doesn't really talk about the hows so much, so we can leave that open to interpretation. And this might shock some people, but in reality, there's many believing, well-informed Christians who also believe in the process of evolution. In fact, the Catholic Church made it an official statement acknowledging evolution as part of a compatible way of reading Scripture. The only difference is Christians could believe in a different process, but not in the belief of naturalism. Now, naturalism is where people only believe what they see in the physical world while not believing that there may be a God that is moving everything. Now, I want to stop here for a moment because I'm not supporting a certain process. I don't want you guys to go out of this room and be like, yo, Pastor Paul believes in evolution, like, yeah, leave this church. Like, I don't know. That's not where I'm getting at, Please don't leave this sermon saying that. That's not the point. But what I really want to state is that the process is not that important. Especially if you believe in a God that created the world, because he can do whatever he wants. If God wanted to create the world in a literal 6 days, he can. And he's a God can do whatever he wants. He's not trapped into the processes of the world. I mean, he can create a fully functioning human being without starting from the egg and the sperm. He can just make it happen. And he's a full-form being, just like he can create a billion-year-old earth in one word. He can just make it happen. I believe in God, not in a process. But what I want to point out is this. It's not about proving science. Science is only a tool to see and examine the material world that God created. It always has limitations. And science alone can't prove many things in this world. Think about it. It can't prove ethics. It can't prove why we have morals in our hearts. It can't prove why we have love. It can't prove that we have a purpose. It can't prove that we have a mind and creativity and reason. It can't even prove its own origin or destiny. Let alone prove God's existence. Even Tim Keller, he says this, the problem comes when science itself or evolution is turned into an all-encompassing theory trying to explain absolutely everything we believe, feel, and do as a product of natural selection. And if it does that, then we're not in the arena of science anymore. We're in the arena of philosophy. See, the idea of secularism or this rejection of God in general leaves us in a world where you can only make sense of it from what we see in the physical world. And in this narrow belief, it leads people to reject a lot of things, right? Reject miracles, reject Christ's resurrection from the dead, reject the virgin birth, reject the supernatural, reject that prayer does things, simply because they can't find an answer to how those things happen in the physical world. And, an illustration was shared by a famous philosopher named Alvin Plantinga, but he said this. It's kind of like your drunk friend, right, who after drinking a lot dropped his keys somewhere on the street, and he insists that he can only look under the light because that's the easiest place to look at it. And he's going and looking for it. In fact, it goes even further. It's more like a guy insisting because the keys would be hard to find in the dark, they must only be under the light. And I was like, oh, that's a good way to put it, And if we're going to see that it's not really believing in God that is a leap of faith, but it's equally or probably even more of a faith statement to say that God cannot exist. And that statement is not any more rational or intelligent. And this is where we find some insight in Paul's book of Romans. Romans 1:19 to 22 says this. Let me read this to you guys. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived, ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so that they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. Now, when reading this passage, we know that Paul has a definite worldview. He believes in God. Therefore, everything he sees, he can see God everywhere. He has a definite worldview. In fact, he goes and says, look at the world. How can you not see God? Look at how it points to our Creator. It points to his attributes, his character. It points to his intellect, his love, his righteousness and power. But what Paul is saying, that this is not just a subjective thing. It's not because I'm a believer and I see these things. It's plain. He's saying if you look at it objectively, you can see God. And this is what theologians over and over again have called natural revelation. This is God showing himself through natural things in this world. And people are looking at these natural things and they're like, oh my gosh, there's definitely a God. And there's natural revelation and special revelation, which we're going to talk about next week. But Paul is saying, spend some time, look at the world, look at it deeply. You're going to see God's hands everywhere. More than you think. It's not about physically or scientifically proving God, but it's about showing that the world makes more logical sense if he was real. And I'm going to go over a few points today, and these are very popular points. If you guys have come across them at some point, then you're going to be like, oh, I remember these. I'm just going to go over 4. But there's 4 things that a lot of people have talked about the natural world that points to God. One is cosmic wonder. This is kind of a logical argument. Cosmic wonder. Have you guys ever just laid down on the grass and just laid there and looked up into the sky? You're like under a shade and the breeze comes and you're like, wow, it feels so good to be here. You feel kind of joy in your heart. And then suddenly you ask this question, why? And you're like, why do I feel this way? And you're like, oh, it's nice up. But why does it feel nice out? Well, my mind feels this way. And then you keep asking why and you keep asking why. And suddenly you land at a place where you say, where did everything come from? Where did everything come from? Why is this world here? And the cosmic wonder argument is stating this. Everything in the world comes from something that is already there. Things exist because it has a cause, and it just doesn't pop out of nowhere. I mean, babies just don't pop out of nowhere, and they look like a certain way without parents. They don't just pop out of nowhere. They come from somewhere. So let's take a moment and take God out of the picture of the universe. If this was the case, either physical matter just came out of nowhere, or the world was always there without a beginning, without an origin. And when scientists were able to finally come up with technology to look at outer space and the universe, they found something amazing. I think this was like the Hubble telescope, and they're looking and they see the rest of the universe. They discovered something amazing. They discovered that the universe was expanding. All the stars were coming out. And they're like, yo, what's going on here? Everything's moving outwards. As time keeps going, things are moving out. Wait, if we rewind time, that would mean everything would go inwards. And then they're like, oh my gosh, and even the smartest physicists of the world, they're like, dang, there must have been one origin, the Big Bang. And, everyone's talking about the Big Bang and, Big Bang Theory, pretty good sitcom, and everything's coming out. And they're like, okay, how do we explain the Big Bang? And this is where they're like, oh my gosh, it either came out of nowhere or somebody created it. Which faith are you going to take? And they realized that it was a worldview question. The second one is perceived design. Perceived design. I'll never forget when a USC engineering student came up to me, and I think I said this before, but he came up to me and was like, Pastor Paul, I need to talk to you. I was like, what's up? He was like, yo, I was looking at mathematics, I was looking at physics, and I discovered God. I was like, really? I wish I could discover him that way too. But I think he was talking about the perceived design of the world. How does everything work in such a precise way? That so many things need to be accounted for that it's almost impossible to believe that it's random. Another grad student at UCLA engineering program told me that he was like, many of the guys that he studies with, the physicists and even their professors, believe in a God simply because of how the world works. And they even use terms like God-given laws to talk about the constants of how the earth works. And he went on, he was like, yo, Pastor P, look at the speed of light, the gravity, the boiling points, all these formulas that we calculate everything. He was like, if one of those things didn't work out, there would be no life on earth. And I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, man. And he went on, he was like, everything coming together is like 10 to the negative 100th power for all those things to randomly happen. He was like, I know it doesn't disprove God, it doesn't prove God, but it certainly does point to him. And I was like, I think it does too, man. I've been there I already believe in it, yo. But it's like when we read an awesome novel, right? Written. And you fall into this novel, you read the book, you see the storyline, you see the passion, you see that. And when you read a storybook, you can always notice something about the author, right? Sometimes you can notice what part of the country he grew up in just by the nuances that he talks about. You can figure out what generation he grew up in. You can see what he actually likes, the genres that he likes, simply by reading a book. So when we see something that has a design, we assume that there is a designer. Or when we read a novel, we assume that there's an author. The interesting thing about the Bible, it says that God is the author of life. To say that there isn't a creator is to assume somebody kind of just threw up a bunch of letters, 1,000,000 letters, and they all fell onto the ground and made a story with perfect grammar and perfect spelling and everything, and it read with all this passion and different things. And they're like, could that actually happen? And even if that was the case, we're back to cosmic wonder, right? Who threw up all the letters? A lot of new atheists actually go against this, and they refute it because they know it's a strong case. And the only one that actually came up with something very logical was Stephen Hawking, and he was like, hey, there's probably multiple billions of universes out there, and we just happen to be one. 13 billion years ago, when there was a big bang, trillions of parallel universes formed, and we just happen to be in the one that has life. And then you stop and you think, dang, who has more faith? Who has more faith? The third point is moral realism. This one we touched on a few times, especially throughout the sermon series when we talked about how can a good God allow suffering. We talked about how the mere fact that we know that something is good or bad, or good or evil, or when we see innocent suffering, that feeling that we know that that's wrong, the whole area of ethics and morality point to the fact that God exists. I read a book called Language of God by Francis Collin a while back, and it's about a story of a doctor or a scientist atheist who came to Christian faith. He was a doctor who headed the Human Genome Project, the whole research on human DNA and everything. And he wrote a book that one of the turning points of him coming to faith in Christ was when he began to see a moral law written everywhere. He was like, how could I have not seen this before? It's like physics. There's an ethics that we always argue and talk about. And he was like, even in the area of medicine, we always debate on what is ethical, what is right. Or is it right to do research on human embryos or do stem cell research? Is it okay? The sanctity of life is always brought up. And he was like, every doctor has to make an oath that they'll preserve life. And he was like, why do we do that? And he was like, oh my gosh, how could I have missed this whole time? And he said, how could I have not noticed that everyone attempted to appeal to an unstated higher standard, this moral law, this law of right behavior, this belief that life was sacred. And when he began to see all the kindness of people, the heart that wanted to help others, even if it had nothing to do with them or didn't help them at all, and what the Bible calls agape love, this unconditional love, he was like, how does this fit in a world that doesn't have God, or just a material world where everything is just done for the survival of the fittest? Sometimes we fail to realize that the basis of all of our moral values, our laws, our ethics, are so tightly connected to a creator God who sets those moral standards that we just can't deny. And of course, there's other explanations for this, but I wonder who has more faith. The last one I want to touch on really quick is our own consciousness. The other evidence that points to God is our own minds. Have you guys ever wondered why so many people search for truth, love? We grasp onto faith. If we don't have hope, we'd rather die. Even if we have all the good things in life, we're depressed. See, our hearts and our minds don't work in just having sustenance to survive. We have joys and ambitions. We fall into depression. We seek for identity and freedom. We fall in love even though it doesn't make sense. We have emotions. And sometimes you got to think like, man, are those simply molecules coming together in different nerve cells to make us respond in certain ways? A pastor challenged a skeptic like this. Let me read this to you guys. If you also believe that your self-consciousness, free choice, love, and the ability to seek truth is what it means to be a human, if you believe that your sense of significance of love is not an illusion produced by genes, then you should be very reluctant to accept that the material reality is all there is. Consciousness and idea making make far more sense in a universe created by an idea-making conscious God. Perhaps there's a reason why most of the world is searching for truth. Most of the world searched for God. And surely it's not only a fraction of the world that don't believe that there is a God. Surely they're not the only ones that are enlightened. I wonder who has the bigger leap of faith. And Paul, with this, in our passage, he says, with all these evidences that point to God, the feelings that we have in our heart, how can we not see him? And he says, more than proofs against God, it is our rebellion that blinds us from seeing him. See, some scholars, when reading Paul's passage, they said there's probably two things going on. One, there's 4 first-order beliefs versus second-order beliefs. So first-order beliefs, just to explain it real quick, are beliefs that we can sense without even thinking about it, something that we know to be true in our hearts. And it seems that Paul is saying that we as humans, with our consciousness and our morals and this sense that we have to do something, this all comes from God. And we know that we have this idea of God in our hearts. And this is what even John Calvin says is a sense of the divine. But the second order belief is something that suppresses it. Something that because it's too much for us to handle, and it will change the way we think or change the way we live, so we don't want to believe it. Now, I want to share with you guys a story that I heard. It's a true story that perfectly explains Paul's point in suppressing truth. They said some years ago there was a man who was married, and he had a little daughter. After he had the little daughter, a little bit after that, his wife died tragically somehow. And after his wife died, literally all of his life fell apart. His career fell apart. His business fell apart. And now all he did was look to this one daughter for everything. He wanted to give her the best life. So he, did what any father would do, showed her love, gave her everything she wanted, even to the point of being spoiled. And one day he decides that he wants to put her into a boarding school, the best school ever, and puts her in there. A few months later, he receives a call from the principal saying, hey, your daughter, she's a thief. She stole from this one other student and stole from this other student, even stole from the teacher. I think you got to come in and we got to talk about this. And now the father, he's hearing all these things. He was like, oh my gosh, no, this can't be true. My daughter cannot be a thief. And he was like, no, you're wrong. In fact, everything that you guys are thinking of. And he was like, you know what? I think it happened this way. That one girl probably didn't like my daughter because she was prettier. And the other girl didn't like my daughter because she was too smart. And then the teacher did like those other 2 students, so they all planned it together and pinned it on my daughter. You know what? I'm going to take my daughter out because you guys are wrong. And he took the daughter out and put her into another school. A few months later, gets a phone call again saying, hey, your daughter, I think, is a thief. She stole from this person, and that person. The father, again, says the same story and takes her daughter out. Takes her to another school. It happens a third time. And then when you think about it, I think this is what suppression of truth actually feels like. I think the father actually knew what the truth was. He knew the tendencies of the daughter, what she could do, how he raised her, and how she could be spoiled. But his second order of beliefs that wanted to reject it, didn't want to believe it, made it spin out all the evidences in a different way. And I think this is what Paul means. Paul means when he says, for although they knew God, they did not honor him or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man, birds, animals, and creeping things. And many people, even though they can see what creation may point to, they suppress the truth, thinking they are wise and they're logical, and they miss the bigger picture. And people have done this, right? Often because they don't want to admit that their life is held accountable by a bigger God. Most of the people that end up rejecting God is once they realize that faith is calling them to live a different life, and they spin it in a different way, like, no, that can't be. And they reject him. Or others will choose to create their own gods to fit their own desires and wants. This is what Paul calls seeking idols, instead of seeking the true God and serving him. And I wonder, do we suppress the truth of God in this way? Perhaps the world does. Sometimes I wonder, our generation, we're so gung-ho about things that point to God these days, right? We're so gung-ho about culture, creativity. We're so gung-ho about justice and human rights, gung-ho about love, goodness, community, purpose, meaning, destiny, hope, and faith. However, most of the world, they want to take God out of it so they don't have to be held accountable. The universe points to a good creative God that made us into his image, made us to love. But guys, knowing God in creation is not enough. The universe does point to a God behind the scenes, but may we not forget that God has also made himself known. Next week we're going to talk about how can we trust in the Bible. God has given us his words and revealed himself in a special way, and his words have become a lamp unto our feet to see truth more clearly in our world. And the more we know about God, the more we're able to see him working in the world. In the Bible, we learned that God not only created the heavens and the earth, but he also loved the earth and its people. And he gave it a purpose. He gave it a calling and a destiny. And he called us to live in a good way with love of our God and love of our neighbors. Yet as humans, we feel, don't we know, and we can see it, right? Our news feeds remind us that sin is there and our world is broken and in need of renewal. In the Bible, we learned that, yes, we live in a broken world, yet God sends his son to redeem it, to heal it, to bring it back to its original purpose. And through Jesus Christ, we can hope for the future, hope for a world without sin, hope for heaven, and back to a relationship with God. And the more we know God through his word, the more we can see our world more clearly. And we're going to talk about this more next week. Let's pray.